Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week, I welcome the founder of the Functional Medicine Pharmacists Alliance, Dr. Lauren Castle. During the show, we discuss how her experiences working with Walmart in influencer marketing, personal branding helped prepare her for growing her business, why she started the FMPhA to integrate pharmacists into functional medicine and functional medicine into pharmacy, and how she planned for the transition over 5 years from employee to entrepreneur. Now, before we jump into the show, I recognize that many listeners may not be aware of what the team at YFP Planning does in working one-on-one with more than 280 households in 40 plus states. YFP Planning offers fee-only, high-touch financial planning that is customized for the pharmacy professional. If you're interested in learning more about how working one-on-one with a certified financial planner may help you achieve your financial goals, you can book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Whether or not YFP Planning's financial planning services are a good fit for you, know that we appreciate your support of this podcast and our mission to help pharmacists achieve financial freedom. Okay, let's jump into my interview with Dr. Lauren Castle. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim.
So this episode has been a long time in the making. We've crossed paths for many years now through Ohio Pharmacy Association and other circles. We share our alma mater, Ohio Northern. So go Polar Bears.
Yep.
So let's start there with your career path into pharmacy. What led you into the profession and how you ultimately landed the work that you've been doing with Walmart really for over the last 10 years now?
Sure. So like many people, I decided I wanted to go to pharmacy school when I was in high school. I actually had started working at an independent pharmacy in Monroe, Michigan, and absolutely loved it. So I thought for sure I was going to go to pharmacy school and become a pharmacy owner whenever I graduated. I ultimately ended up meeting my husband while I was in school, and that is what led me to pursue a different internship. And I thought to myself, what better time to just get some totally different experience? I've already got my path laid out. I know what I want to do, but just in case, I'll check out the exact opposite of an independent pharmacy, right? Like the largest company in the world. Mm-hmm. So I joined Walmart, and that summer, I just completely fell in love with it. It was still felt like I owned my own pharmacy in a sense, but yet I had all of these resources and all of this capacity to literally influence millions of people. And I kind of figured that out because I shared a little story on their sort of social media, internet company website about Walmart's 50th anniversary and my experience as an intern. Didn't really think anyone would read it or care, but that story actually got picked up and it was published in our home office newsletters. And so our president of health and wellness at the time had read it and sent it down to, my supervisors. And that was sort of the aha moment for me that I realized I'm just one person in a company of over 2 million employees worldwide, and I actually can make a difference. And so that was sort of the theme of these last 12 years that I've really been able to continue on with.
I love that, starting with the concept of let me use, the internship, and for some it might be, experiential rotations as an opportunity to see something different. I often share with students, if I had to go back and do anything different in pharmacy school, it would be to really reevaluate those precious summer internships and then those 9 or 10 months of experiential rotations, because the safe plays are always going to be there, right? And it's what a unique opportunity where you have a month or a summer that you can see something that's completely, different, and obviously building, relationships and having different experiences, and those more traditional opportunities will be there. But such a unique time to see those things, and so cool to hear you take advantage of those. Let's talk about some of those experiences with Walmart a little bit more, because no disrespect in any way to pharmacists that are out there working the bench day in and day out, but that was not your gig. With Walmart, certainly you've done that, but as you look at your experiences with Walmart, it's very, I would say, non-traditional in those experiences with Walmart, in terms of, you alluded to some of that, with some of the posts that you were sharing early on that got picked up, nationally. You've had some experiences working with them more in that influencer marketing, personal branding, wellness side of things. Tell us about those experiences, because I suspect, as we'll talk about more of the work that you're doing with the Functional Medicine Pharmacists Alliance here in a little bit, those experiences were really critical to the work that you're doing now as well.
They certainly are. So I mentioned, even from the very beginning, I started sharing my story in the company. And I think no matter what company you're working for, there's actually a book I've recently read that talks about how purpose is more than a side hustle. And it's actually the way you show up for other people every day. So it
Mm,
doesn't matter what type of role you're in, if you're in a 9 to 5 job, if you're working as an entrepreneur, you're living your purpose every day
yeah.
and you can tell your story in whatever role that you're in. So for me, that really looked like sharing what I was doing on social media and sharing little bits of how I work as a pharmacist for the company. And ultimately, that is what led to some additional opportunities that I had to get promoted. So, networking, of course, is huge. A lot of times people will say it's not, what you do, but it's more around like who you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, I was always trying to reach out and connect with people on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
So every market director, when I was an intern, I was connected with them. They knew who I was, they knew my name, they knew my face. I would show up, like you mentioned, Ohio Pharmacists Association meetings, make sure that I was involved in professional activities as a
Yeah.
pharmacist. And that networking is really what led me to get promoted to a pharmacy manager to a clinical pharmacist manager whenever we actually moved to Michigan, and ultimately to a market director.
Mm-hmm.
So, 5 years after graduation, I became a market health and wellness director, which was sort of my big goal as an intern once I joined Walmart. And that role was incredible. And I learned so much, just from managing teams, managing people, really managing a business, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yet again, continuing to share my story on social media. And at the time, I had also started getting into functional medicine. And so now
Mm-hmm.
this was a new aspect of the story I was telling, and also was picked up and seen by people at our home office.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the moment that really kind of catapulted things to what my real dream was, right? Like I'd already met this milestone from just oh, I got promoted, I'm a market director,
Yep.
this is awesome, to, well, now I want to go work at our home office. Like
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to Arkansas. I want to go and really make a difference for the company. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but as I was talking about functional medicine and how, I really felt like it aligned with some of the things Walmart does around helping people save money and live better.
Mm-hmm.
And you really do have everything that you need to live a healthy life at an affordable price in the stores. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was the theme, that was the message I was sharing. And I ultimately ended up getting to meet our president of health and wellness, and this was back in 2019. He was a fellow Ohioan, so he came out and
Awesome.
visited. We, sat down, and as we were eating lunch, started talking about this concept of food as medicine. And they were like, "This is awesome. We think this is a great idea. We would love for you to come out and share more and see how this would integrate with Walmart Health," which at the time they were just starting to build those
Yep.
as primary care centers.
Mm-hmm.
So, didn't really think anything of it. I was like, okay, yeah, cool. That'd be awesome. Would love to come out. A couple weeks later, I got a phone call and they're like, hey, we need you to come out like this week to meet Stuart Walton
Mm-hmm.
of the Walton
The
family.
Waltons. Yep. Yep.
And like, that's one of those
What?
calls that you never expect to get in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was, my dream, right? Like, as I was sitting here trying to figure out, like, how am I going to get to home
Yeah.
office? What am I going to do? You just keep taking the next step, right? You just keep living your purpose.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's going to all come together. So I spent 3 months out there on a special project, basically looking at how we would integrate nutrition in with the services that we have in health and wellness. And as we were getting ready to pick out our first store, it was kind of the end of the year. There were some leadership changes. They sort of
Mm-hmm.
paused all of the projects and said, we're gonna hold off for a little bit. 2020 hits, and of course, the whole world shuts down,
Yeah.
and it's COVID. So,
Yeah.
silver lining, of course, is that we would have never been able to do a lot of the things we wanted to do anyways. And that also was the moment for me that I realized, this has been an amazing journey with Walmart, but I also realized that I can't put my dreams in someone else's hands.
Yeah.
So that was the moment that I came home and I actually started my LLC for the Functional Medicine
Yeah.
Pharmacists Alliance too.
I love that. So much to unpack there, but I think one of the things you just shared, which we'll come back and talk about your journey, really growing the Functional Medicine Alliance, spending more and more time on that is, not necessarily putting your own dream in someone else's hands, but also recognizing that the experiences that you do have working for someone else can be so valuable in catapulting, what you're working on, and also just the experiences, the network, all of what you shared. But when I hear your success and ultimately getting to that point where you're going to meet someone from the Walton family, what comes to mind is that the reason that moment happened is because you, for years, were consistently showing up and providing value. And then the compound effect of that just worked its magic, as it always does, if you're consistently showing up, providing value. And that's value in person in the work that you're doing every day. That's value in developing, your personal brand and helping other people, staying connected in in-person meetings, virtual meetings on LinkedIn and other things. And I think we sometimes lose sight of that when we see someone who has gotten to the point of launching a business, or they've grown a following of, whatever number of followers on LinkedIn, and they've got a great personal brand. It's been a decade in the making, right? And it started with that, leap of faith, if you will, that you took as an intern to say, hey, I'm going to post this out there. Maybe somebody thinks this is interesting, maybe it's not, but I know the value in sharing my story. And I know the value of showing up every day and providing, value. And it might be that in any one day, maybe there's not an obvious like ROI on that, but over time, consistently that really can take off. So let's talk 2017, if I'm correct. 2017, you actually started the Functional Medicine Pharmacists Alliance, and we'll link to that in the show notes, FMPhA.org. I'm curious, before we get into kind of why you decided to go that pathway with starting the alliance to really have the impact in functional medicine, where does your personal interest in functional medicine and this concept of food as medicine, where does that come from?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I had become a clinical pharmacy manager when we lived in Michigan. And Michigan is where we discovered functional medicine. So, my husband and I, he also was working in a pretty high level job for a big company and was having a ton of health issues, super stressed, had
Mm-hmm.
struggled with losing weight, couldn't sleep, had gut issues, just felt terrible all the time. And as a pharmacist, I thought I was doing everything right to help him try to feel better. But, at the end of the day, I kind of said, I think if you go to the doctor, they're just going to hand you a bunch of pills and
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to help you all that much. It's just going to cover up these side effects. And, I don't know what is wrong. It seems like we're doing everything right and nothing seems to be
Mm-hmm.
working. And we got a flyer on our doorstep for a integrative wellness center. And it basically listed out all these, side effects and symptoms. And I just handed it to Seth and I said, babe, this is you on paper. Like you have all of these problems. So whatever these people do, I think you should go check out this seminar that they're doing this weekend and see what this functional medicine stuff's all about.
Mm-hmm.
So he went to the seminar, ended up signing up for this program. We paid $5,000 out of pocket to work with these people for basically 12 weeks.
Okay.
And it sort of included everything. So it had all of these different labs that we didn't learn about in pharmacy school, supplements that I'd never heard of, and this elimination diet where we
Mm-hmm.
basically were going to cut out most of the foods that we were still eating
Mm-hmm.
that we thought were healthy, like whole wheat bread and skim milk,
Mm-hmm.
and basically eat this sort of paleo style of a diet. And within just a few weeks, he was feeling so much better. Pretty much all the symptoms dropped off and he lost 20 pounds.
Wow.
It was just like incredible.
Yeah.
So, as I continued reading more about functional medicine, the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio was actually starting a
Yep.
center for functional
I
medicine that
remember that.
same year. And so to me, that was sort of the moment that I was like, all right, I think there's something to this functional medicine stuff, and Cleveland Clinic's doing it. So it's got to be pretty reputable. And I decided at that point, I really think this is the future for healthcare and for pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I knew also at the time I was looking into other degree programs. So I did not do a residency after pharmacy school. And at that point, I was, a clinical pharmacist, but I was looking to get promoted to a market director. So I was looking at MBA programs,
Yep.
things like that. And I decided, well, maybe I'll look into programs for this functional medicine stuff. There was one master's program in the US that was in conjunction with the Institute for Functional Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And that, of course, is also who Cleveland Clinic was working with. So I figured, all right, this sounds like it's pretty reputable, right? So I ended up enrolling in that master's program and was still working as a clinical pharmacist. We had just gotten engaged. We were planning a wedding, really burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah, right.
But I was loving it. Everything made so much sense. And as I was starting to learn all of this new functional medicine knowledge, I started talking to other pharmacists about it. So, Melody Hartzler, who you've interviewed
Yeah.
on the show before, her and I reconnected. She had gotten into this through her own health journeys,
Yeah.
and other people that I'd gone to school with or had met through pharmacy conferences were getting into this space. And I started to realize that we all need to come together. Like, we need to form a little community and stay in touch and figure out what this is going to look like for the profession. So that was sort of where the Facebook came from, was just
Mm-hmm.
this idea of like, let's get together, let's kind of bring everyone in this space and start collaborating. And was also starting to teach other pharmacists.
Yep.
So Ohio Pharmacists Association had me do a CE presentation in
Mm-hmm.
2017, and that was sort of the start of it. So we introduced the Facebook group, we did the CE, recorded it, and that same year, I also got invited to speak at the Michigan Pharmacists Association. And in those basically 4 months, I decided to actually create a website and post my story on there and not have it just be a Facebook group, but
Yep.
actually set up FMPhA.org, which I always give credit to Alex Barker, another friend of the YFP
Yeah.
team, because he's the one who told me, like, why don't you just make an organization? And I'm
Yeah.
like, I can't make a pharmacy organization.
I remember us talking about that back in 2017. I just love that concept. It was such a non-traditional way to think about how to influence the space and really how to try to meet, many people instead of, I mean, sure, you can meet with people one-on-one and have a great impact, but how can you be an aggregate of, the pharmacists that are practicing functional medicine and bring them together? So yeah, I love that idea. That's a great one.
Yeah.
So when just so I'm understanding, the actual formation of FMPHA as a business, you mentioned just a few moments ago forming the LLC. When you started the Facebook group, when you were providing CE, when you actually built the website, at that point, you hadn't yet formed the business. Is that correct?
Nope, no
Okay.
business whatsoever. And I never set out to make any
Yeah.
money off of this. It was truly just I believe in this so much and I want to bring
Yeah.
other pharmacists into it, that I'm just going to start sharing these resources that I'm learning and trying to connect with more people
Yeah.
and bring us all together. And so, yeah, it wasn't until the Facebook group continued to grow and
Mm-hmm.
we went from 30 people at the very beginning to 500 people. And so then 2018, the next year, I was at Institute for Functional Medicine conference and was talking to their leadership, and I'm like, oh, we have 500 pharmacists in a Facebook group. They want to do functional medicine. How do we actually get them more
Yeah.
involved in the care team? Because at the time, IFM really didn't have any resources that were geared towards pharmacists. It was mostly towards physicians. And so they
Mm-hmm.
didn't even know what to do with us, right? Just like
Yeah.
a lot of the medical profession, it's sort of like the pharmacist role is very misunderstood and kind of left behind or left out of the picture. So that was sort of the next step, that I was like, okay, well, how can we start to work with other
Mm-hmm.
organizations? Um, and then in 2019 is when I ended up going out to do the special project. And kind of coming back from there, I had also spoken with another pharmacist, Jarika Dodd, and
Mm-hmm.
she was the one who then gave me the push of like, Lauren, you got to
Do it.
monetize this thing. Like, you have got to start actually setting up a
Yeah.
business and really taking this seriously, because you're sitting on, a gold mine in a
Yep.
sense, because people are hungry for this. They want
Yes.
this. And yeah, we were at a functional medicine symposium, and I had someone that asked me, how do I become a member? How do I join? How do I sign up today?
Let
And
me
I was
figure
like,
that out.
I will get back to you.
But Lauren, what I really like about that is I don't want to lose that there was at least 2 years, until that point of, okay, how can I monetize this? We're providing value. It's growing, which there should be. Jarika is correct. As you're building something that's providing value to others, like there's a fair price that can and should be charged for that. But you focused on providing value first. And Pat Flynn talks about that, one of my favorite podcast and a blog that really influenced my journey early on the Smart Passive Income podcast. He talks about the value of really focusing on providing resources, providing value, building your community, really making the deposits in the bank and doing that authentically. And the business will grow from there over time. And I think your story is such a cool example of that. Before we talk more about the actual transition and how and when you made that transition to spend more of your time working on the business and less of the time on the W2 side of things, tell us more about what does FMPhA look like today in terms of, you went through this journey of, okay, we need to monetize this. Is it a membership model? Is it, there's paying for certain resources and being a part of the community? What does it look like in terms of the business today?
Absolutely. So today it is a membership, much like many pharmacy organizations that you can join. We're bringing together pharmacists in community through the Facebook still, of course, which is a free resource. But really, the advocacy piece is sort of what's most important to me. We partner with a few different organizations in functional medicine, one being the Institute for Functional Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So when you join, you have the option to also add on IFM membership at basically a discounted rate. And we also were able to work with them to get a 20% discount on their trainings, which one of the top questions that we get asked is, okay, I'm interested in functional medicine. Where do I get training?
Yeah.
Do I need to get certified? And so the answer is you don't have to get certified, but certainly, just like with any type of training,
Yeah.
having that additional, credential is going to speak for itself in terms of working with other providers. And so we really were wanting to get more pharmacists into that organization. And so part of that was, how can we make it more
Mm-hmm.
affordable? Because again, it's not cheap. A lot of these certifications are
Yeah.
upwards of $10,000 or even $20,000. So that was kind of our first big step. We also worked with them to actually get the word pharmacist listed as a
Love it.
provider type, right? So it's the little things to some of these organizations that mean a lot to us as
Yes,
pharmacists and
for
to the
sure.
profession.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things we do. We also work with A4M, which is the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
We also have discounted rates on their training programs as well. So those are sort of the big two um, training programs that we've partnered with. And then we're actually working on launching our very first course for members. So, Functional Medicine Pharmacist Bootcamp will be launching in January as of the time of this recording. And that's really the culmination of all of these, 7+ years of
That's
working
right.
in functional medicine, trying to figure out how do we actually do this as pharmacists, and answering a lot of those frequently asked questions around training and
Yeah.
how to implement it and what types of jobs you might be able to find or create for yourself. And really just putting all of those pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
So, the last couple of services that we also offer, of course, is with CE. We have a few different
Mm-hmm.
partners there. At the time, again, when I got into this, there was no CE for pharmacists in functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got, a couple different partners that we work with that are offering functional medicine CE. So that's another area. And then, of course, we have our annual meetup in conjunction with functionalmedicinece.com. And we have our meetup there every year, usually in the fall. So in-person event. It's been really great to get back together with people and actually again, bring that networking together, because you
Yeah.
never know who you're going to meet and where they're at in their journey and how they might be able to help you as well.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious to get your opinion on is from an outsider's perspective, kind of following the functional medicine movement, seeing more pharmacist clinicians start to dabble in this space, I think for really good reasons. Um, I'm not seeing a lot of differentiation. And as I've talked to a couple people that are starting up a business, of which I know very little about functional medicine, but I'm looking at it from a business perspective, what really is glaring to me at first is like, why you, why your services? There's not like a compelling differentiation that I'm seeing there. And so as someone who I think spent a lot of time building a strong personal brand, doing influencer marketing, really building, a niche of what you're doing out there and understands the importance of that differentiation. What advice would you have someone for, that's listening and saying, hey, I'm really interested in functional medicine, about how they might differentiate themselves in this space and what they're offering?
Yeah, so I think you bring up a good point, and that was sort of another reason that I finally kind of pulled everything together into this boot camp course, is that I had a lot of pharmacists that were coming and saying, I'm studying functional medicine and I want to figure out how to use it. And I think everyone somehow or another, because of course, a lot of this really picked up steam during COVID
Hmm.
in 2020, and virtual or telehealth became kind of the norm for a little while. And so a lot of people assumed that, like, oh, if I'm a pharmacist, I can quit my pharmacist job and launch a virtual functional medicine practice and become a millionaire. Like,
Patients will be flooding and scheduling
yes,
left and right.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And for some people, they can do that. For a lot of people, it's not that simple.
No.
And so, what I really try to work with pharmacists to understand is that there's no one way to practice functional medicine. And it's just a lens through which you are going to use your pharmacist license. So, more often than not, if you want to do a virtual practice, yes, we can help connect you with the resources that you need to set that up. But is that really the way that you want to serve your
Yeah.
patients? If you're someone who isn't necessarily a big fan of social media and putting your face out there and having to tell your story over and over and over every single day to try and attract patients in a virtual practice, what about considering working with a physician in
Yeah.
your local practice,
Yeah.
right? What about a chiropractor? What about an independent pharmacy? Do you have a compounding pharmacy somewhere?
Yeah.
There's all of these other pharmacy settings where functional medicine can be an additional service that you bring to the table to provide to reach those patients that really need it the most,
Yeah.
right? And so it's really about figuring out your skill sets and what areas of pharmacy you are most passionate about, and then thinking about how you can apply a functional medicine approach to
Yeah.
whatever that is. So, for a lot of people, it might be figuring out how to set up a collaborative practice agreement so you
Hmm.
can practice at the top of your license. Or it might be walking into an independent pharmacy and seeing if you can get a job as a pharmacist there, leading their health and wellness programs.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
lots of different options to think about, before you just kind of go and quit the day job
Yeah.
and start trying to launch a virtual practice.
Let's shift gears here and talk about the transition that you've made from employee to entrepreneur, at least where you're spending the majority of your time now focused on Functional Medicine Pharmacists Alliance. And you had this to say a few months ago on LinkedIn. You said, it took 5 years to get here, but it feels amazing to finally have the time and space to pursue this fully. It hit me right after I got back from the Diversify RX that I had used up all my PTO in the 9 to 5 job in order to attend pharmacy conferences this year. So I did the math, realized I could work part time for the same salary, and then turned in my resignation. Tell us more about what led you. I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this moment several times, but what was it specifically that you said, hey, this is the moment, I'm ready?
Yeah. So, to provide a little more background, at the time earlier this summer, I was working for a company called Brand Networks. So, I mentioned before, I sort of have been burning the candle at both ends for a number of years, working as a market health and wellness director. Of course, COVID happened. And I was also a caregiver for my mom, who ultimately passed away last year. And so after that moment, I actually had taken a 12-week leave from my market director job that my boss had suggested to me, like, hey, Lauren, you have gone through a lot. And if you
Mm-hmm.
need to take some time away, you can do that. So, just one more thing to consider about, before you leave your job, have you used all of the resources
Yeah.
available for your own health and your mental health? So for me, took those 12 weeks, went through intensive outpatient therapy, really got to kind of heal from a lot of that trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and also found this new path in social media marketing with this company. And so I was able to work remotely from home for a year,
Okay.
still working as just a part-time PRN pharmacist, couple shifts a month. And then kind of the 9 to 5 was in this social media marketing, which yet again was sort of another very intentional choice of, I know that I want to grow FMPhA, which now is a business.
Yep.
And I still have a lot to learn about running a company online.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what a great opportunity to be able to actually work kind of on the inside of running marketing for the world's largest company.
Yeah.
Probably can learn a few things. So,
Yeah.
great experience, amazing team, super fun role. But yes, I was having to take time off in order to actually go to pharmacy conferences, which were finally kind of starting back up again in
Yeah.
2021. And so I was doing a lot of traveling. And even though I was in a remote role, I still didn't really have flexible hours. Like I still had to be available from 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was taking all of this time off, yeah, it hit me because we were planning for our pharmacy symposium in the fall, and I wasn't going to have the PTO to take to go to my own
Your
conference.
own event.
And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And
Yeah.
so that was the moment that, like I said, really just sat down and did the math. And um, it was like, I think it's time. I think
Yeah.
it's time. And so my market director had actually reached back out to me, the one who backfilled my position that I had trained, and said, "Hey, I've got a store open. If you want to come back, whatever hours you want to work,
Oh, it's
we can
amazing.
make it work." So I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I think I'm going to be a 48-hour pharmacist."
Yep.
And it was another one of those moments where it's like, if you would have told intern Walmart pharmacy Lauren that she was going to only work 24 hours a week as a pharmacist one day, I would have thought that like something horrible happened
Yes.
and I was like disabled and like, oh my gosh, like why can I only work 24 hours a week as a pharmacist? That's terrible. But
Yeah.
it took a lot of like unlearning to finally see that, like, oh yeah, there's more to life than
Mm-hmm.
working 40 hours a week
Yeah.
for your company. Like you can actually have your own life and work part-time, still have a good salary and full-time benefits,
Yep.
and do all these other things that you're passionate about.
And I love that the story, and as you're, still working part-time, obviously able to focus more full-time on the business, but you're able to do that. Why? Well, because you left with really good relationships. Well, you haven't left, technically, but you had really good relationships. Somebody who's coming forward, obviously they saw your well-being as a priority. Let's take some time off, refocus. We value you as an individual, also as an employee. And then, hey, what hours do you want? It's like, what? Come again? Like, so I can build this business and focus on that, but still be able to maintain some type of a financial base. And I want to emphasize that because if we hit rewind here for a moment, 2017, FMPhA became a thing, right? Here we are in 2022, 5 years later. This is much more of an off ramp than it is diving into the deep end. And I want to say that emphatically because I have the opportunity to talk with a lot of pharmacists throughout the year that are thinking about different business ideas. And I can tell they feel this internal restlessness and pressure, much of which I think is externally influenced. They see what other people are doing, like Lauren, like other entrepreneurs we featured on the podcast, but they don't know the whole backstory of this was years in the making and it's still in the making, before there's potentially a full-time transition, to the business. And, I share a similar story of working for, in an academic role for about 6, 7 years while I was starting the business until I made that transition full time. And I think that's more of the norm than it is not. And I think there's really good financial reasons to do that. I think there's really good other reasons. You mentioned that, as you're working for that new firm here in the last year and a half, 2 years, that wow, I can get some really good experiences with one of the biggest companies in the world, that obviously you're able to now draw from the value of those experiences and what you're building. So I think just so much to take away there, as again, thinking about this more of as a transition, more as an off ramp, slow and steady, being patient, which is hard, and less about jumping into the deep end. So
Yeah. One thing to add there too, from a financial standpoint, is,
yeah,
that was something that we really thought about throughout this journey, right?
yeah,
Because for me, I'm still planning ahead. You know, one of the beautiful benefits of being a market health and wellness director is, of course, the golden handcuffs, the stock options, those types of things. So for me, I knew it was like, okay, I need to stay with Walmart to really maximize the value of what they
yeah,
provided me as part of my compensation, and really think outside the box of, oh, yeah, I don't have to completely leave the company. I can still work part time and
yeah,
run everything through our ethics department and make sure that, like, yes, you can be a pharmacist and you can work as a contractor
yeah,
employee for Walmart doing social media. Like,
yeah,
look for the and opportunities there, because those are things that are going to, from a financial
hmm,
standpoint, really make more of the work I want to do a possibility. So we're kind of, planning that out as we think ahead of, like, yeah, I still have another year that I definitely need to stay employed with
yeah,
Walmart. So what can I do to make the most of that time, before I even consider leaving in the future?
hmm,
And do I even want to? Do I
yeah,
still want to drop back down from 48 hours to being truly part time hourly again?
yeah,
And then you start thinking about some of the bigger questions, right? Around, like, oh, yeah, well, what are we going to do for insurance and some of those
hmm,
things? Like,
retirement. Yeah,
all the things
exactly.
you have to think about, in terms of starting a
Hmm,
business or leaving a job, especially when, for us, my spouse actually had left his job as well, right? So we mentioned
hmm,
that that was a big root cause of his
yeah,
health issues. And, you know, the case for leaving the job, sometimes that is the solution,
yeah,
but sometimes it's not.
yeah.
So really think about that, evaluate it, and think about all the options. So for us, it looked like one of us leaving the job, one of us transitioning the
Yeah.
job.
That's so great. Look for the and opportunities, and I think when people are building something, there's a lot of internal pressure where you kind of fall into this trap. I know I felt this for a period of time of like, there's option A or there's option B. Either I'm not working on the business or I'm going full time in the business, but there's always more options. There's
Mhm.
always more options, and I think it's, having the creativity to see what those may be as well. I want to wrap up by asking you two questions that I'm adopting and stealing from Tim Ferriss, who asks great questions on his podcast. And the first question is, if you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, metaphorically speaking, getting a message out to all 300,000 plus pharmacists in the US, what would that billboard say, and why would it say that?
So I think for me, what I always like to tell pharmacists that are kind of interested in this functional medicine, or maybe they're starting to hear about it, is, yes, there is a better way than a pill for every ill.
Hmm.
That is this sort of mindset that we're all sort of stuck in whenever we're still in a traditional pharmacist role of, whether it's, dispensing in retail, or, being a clinical pharmacist and
Hmm.
working on making sure everyone's meeting the guidelines, to the T. It's always about, like, adding another pill and making sure that they're on all the right medications. But I think through COVID, we've obviously seen that lifestyle plays such a big role in our
Yeah.
patients' health. And so, how can you start to think about ways to incorporate lifestyle medicine, functional medicine into your patient's health? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, I think that's where the future of healthcare really lies. Um, and a lot of times you kind of have to start with yourself too, right?
Yeah.
Start to evaluate where you can make some of these changes in your own health and your family's health, and talking to your friends about it. and then just continue growing from there and building out sort of that muscle of starting to have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think what intrigues me so much about functional medicine is like, so much of the focus on let's actually get to the root cause. And that takes time. And I think if we take a step back and take off our bias of being trained in a doctorate program and being trained, as a healthcare practitioner, we live in a system that is a for-profit healthcare system that incentivizes efficiency. It does not incentivize taking more time and not dispensing products that aren't going to have revenue associated with it, right? So I think we just have to ask ourselves, always we should be asking ourselves, kind of look at the status quo and what we're doing. Why are we doing it? And is it the best option, that's out there and potentially available? And it's the same thing, you talked about a little bit your personal journey and some time off and some of what I heard there, like the inner work that was being done. That takes time, a lot of time. It's easier to prescribe a medication and to see a physician for 30 minutes, but like that work is so important, obviously for long-term benefits, for quality of life, for optimizing who you are individually as well. So it's just such a good reminder, I think, of like what are the incentives that are out there and are they appropriately aligned, for what we're looking at. My second question here for you is what is one of the best or most worthwhile investments that you have ever made? Could be an investment of money, could be an investment of time, energy, and a training resource. What would you say that is?
Yeah, I think that overall FMPHA has been one
Mm,
big investment, rather than it just being like a business. It's been this journey, this kind of life work of, yes, investing in the beginning money to go back to school and get a master's degree and
yeah.
not take out more loans to do it. um, you know, going and doing more training with different functional medicine schools, for the sake of, hey, I want to be able to actually tell people my honest opinion of these
Mhm.
programs. So I'm going to spend my own money to test them out again before I even have a full on business or am being compensated to do these things. I think about the time my husband and I we were just celebrating Thanksgiving together. And of course, I was also doing a Black Friday promotion. And so he made a comment, of, hey, all of your discretionary time seems to go into FMPHA. And you're spending a lot of time on this. And I was like, well, yeah, I am. But, at the end of that Black Friday promotion, it sort of all paid off, right?
Yeah.
Because then he was able to see, oh, yeah, like this is what you've been building for
Mm.
5 years, right? And
Mhm.
now
Mhm.
kind of entering this next phase for the organization of actually having courses and potentially a podcast next year and
Awesome.
again putting out more of this value for other people.
Mhm.
It has been this labor of love, and
Yeah.
at the same time it's fulfilling, right? It's
Mhm.
what I love to do, and I feel like this is what I'm here to do. So I think FMPHA has sort of been like one big investment with, money, but time and of course energy.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, all right, how do we find the balance of being functional medicine pharmacist CEO and founder, but
Mhm.
then also still having time for life?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what most people are starting to sort of see functional medicine or any type of consulting role as a pharmacist is sort of this opportunity to reevaluate what's most important to you.
Yeah.
And again, from like a purpose standpoint, this is the book that was reading,
Mm.
and, in it just sums it up so perfectly that perfect purpose is more than a side hustle. It's not something you turn on or off depending on the situation or the conversation you find yourself in. Purpose is the unique way you show up every moment of every day to make life better for others. You have a purpose and you can live it out on a full time basis.
Mm.
So
Love
I
that.
just feel like when you think about, investing, everyone's going to be investing their time, their money, their
Mhm.
energy into something. You get to choose what that's going to look like.
I love that. We'll link for those that aren't watching the video. Lauren just showed "Purpose is More Than a Side Hustle" was the book. We'll link to that in the show notes if folks want to check that out. Lauren, this has been fantastic. I knew it would be. So glad to have you on the show. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's been a long time in the making. Where is the best place that individuals can go to learn more about FMPHA as well as to follow your journey?
So FMPhA.org is our main website. You can also find me on drlaurencastle.com. I'm at Dr. Lauren Castle on every single social media platform. So happy to connect with everyone there.
Awesome. We'll link to those in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me again, Tim.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding material should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.